Sportier and more stylish, Volvo's S60 has the compact executive elite in its sights. If you're shopping for a BMW 3 Series, an Audi A4 or a Mercedes C-Class, one of these offers an interesting alternative. Does life really begin at 60? If you're a potential Volvo owner, the answer may well be yes. The Swedish maker's second-generation S60 saloon is, we're told, the most dynamic Volvo ever, both to look at and to drive, something of a departure for a brand that's built its reputation on substance and safety rather than style and sportiness. But then, something pretty radical was needed to break the German stranglehold on the BMW 3 Series dominated compact executive market where this car must compete. Though the Mark I S60 saloon sold over 600,000 units, it never managed that, spending its days instead battling with Saab's 9.3, Lexus's IS and Honda's Accord for scraps under Mercedes, BMW and Audi's table. This one has higher aspirations, and they start with the way that it looks. If in buying a Volvo you expect all the design flair of a chartered accountancy firm, then this car will come as quite a shock, with sharper styling that sets it apart, both inside and out. Now the promise is that this will be matched with a greater emphasis on driving involvement than any model that the company has produced in more than 80 years of its history. A much harder thing to deliver, particularly if, as we've promised, all of this has been achieved without sacrificing the substance and safety part of the brand value proposition. Does it all add up? Let's find out. Now, I've been driving this car for a few days now, and I can't get away from thinking two things. First, that it's not quite as sporty as Volvo thinks it is. And second, that this is probably a very good thing. Now, don't get me wrong, this is the most dynamic car that the Swedish brand has yet brought us. But then they were hardly starting from a class-leading position in that respect. Traditionally, Volvos have always been above ballistic backroad behaviour, instead prioritising comfort, ride and refinement. Attempts in the past to add a little handling vim to that mix have usually been somewhat crudely delivered, compromising the values that made people want to buy into the brand in the first place. But with this S60, we've finally been given a rewarding driver's car that's also a Volvo, at last. Now, the reasons why have much to do with a dynamic chassis, carefully developed over the most demanding British B-roads. You can take this a step further by ticking the box for the optional 4C active chassis, which has adaptive damping that, via comfort, sport and advanced modes, enables the driver to change the character of the car. But even if you do without this and the four-wheel drive system that's been developed for top models, steering that's 10% faster means that this car turns into corners in a way that will be revolutionary to owners of older Volvos. And all this from a car that's still able to offer a more composed ride over poor surfaces and more relaxed long-distance refinement than any that the Mark has yet produced. Under the bonnet, there's certainly no shortage of choice, with petrol people choosing between 150 and 180 brake horsepower versions of the 1.6-litre GT-DI petrol engine, with the T3 and T4 models. There's a T5 as well. That has a 2-litre GT-DI engine with 240 brake horsepower. And at the top of the range, there's an auto-only all-wheel drive 6-cylinder 3-litre T6 with 304 brake horsepower that makes rest to 60 in just 6.2 seconds and has to be reined in at 155 miles an hour. Just as well that, like all S60s, it has a whole raft of safety stuff, which we'll cover in market and model range. Mind you, 86% or more of typical customers for this car will go for a diesel, and here again there's quite a choice. At the foot of the range there's an eco-centric 115 brake horsepower 1.6-litre diesel. That's before you get to the characterfully sounding 5-cylinder diesel engines. There's a 2-litre D3 model that's got 163 brake horsepower, and then the version that I'm driving here, a 2.4-litre D5 that boasts 205 brake horsepower. Now, most will choose the D3. Its 8.7 second 0 to 60 time is only just over a second slower than this D5, and it goes on to 137 mile an hour top speed. There's also an optional 6-speed Geartronic automatic if you want it. If this is the future direction of Volvo design, then the company is probably in very safe hands. British stylist Steve Mattin and his team set out to create something as far away from the boxy Volvo stereotype as they could get. And the result is very handsome indeed, with a coupe-style roofline and Aston Martin-style tail flourishes. The four-door coupe thing, which is apparently what the design studio set out to create, is something Volvo makes a lot of. But just as in creating this car, the engineers set out to create something with the manners of a BMW 3 Series and somehow ended up with a package that will probably please more people more of the time, so it is with the aesthetics. The stylists, you see, may have taken the four-door coupe concept, pioneered in this class by cars like Volkswagen's Passat CC, as their starting point. But the end result they've ultimately delivered will probably end up suiting most buyers better day to day. It's all based on the underpinnings that undergird Volvo's larger and solidly dependable V70 and S80 models, which doesn't sound very exciting until you learn that the same structure is also used in Ford's Mondeo, the most rewarding driver's car in its class. But we're here to talk about what clothes it, flowing lines based on a racetrack design, where instead of ending abruptly, they flow organically, echoing the shapes of a racetrack across a slippery 0.29 CD drag coefficient. Now, Volvo's marketing materials suggested I'd be so carried away by this whole racetrack coupe concept that I'd be surprised to find that this car has rear doors. I wasn't, and I don't think you will be either. Once you get beyond them, you'll find that rear cabin space has been mildly improved over that of the previous generation S60, but still not by enough so that you could comfortably seat 3 adults across the back seat for any real distance. But then that's true of virtually every other car in this sector. The 339-litre boot could be bigger though, so it's just as well that you can flatten the rear seats to extend it. I did like this shallow hinged boot compartment though. You can mess up the floor with muddy boots and so on with the flap raised, and then when you take them out again, put the flap down again and you don't have to worry about cleaning the boot floor. Neat. At the wheel, the most important part of any car, according to Volvo's head of design, it's all very nice indeed, with a premium feel right across the S60 range that you only really get in the most expensive versions of BMW, Mercedes and Audi rivals. Now, if you've come to this car having owned an older S60 model, then you might notice the slightly lower driving position and slightly smaller steering wheel, but more obvious is the way that the signature Volvo floating console is angled more towards the driver for a more cockpit-orientated feel. Otherwise, the seats are brilliantly comfortable, the controls are clear, and everything feels solidly built. Most S60 variants are priced in the £20,000 to £30,000 bracket, common to cars in the compact executive sector. Now, those prices see this car somewhere between wannabe compact executive contenders like Saab and Alfa Romeo and the brands that actually rule the roost here, BMW, Audi and Mercedes. And against this Teutonic triumvirate, this Volvo actually looks pretty good value. The 163 brake horsepower D3 diesel variant that most will probably want will save you about £1,500 over a Spartan entry-level BMW 318D or an Audi A4 2-litre TDI 143 PS. And this 205 brake horsepower D5 diesel that I've got here looks even better value, likely to save you up to £3,000 over BMW 3 Series or Audi A4 alternatives. Whichever S60 variant you choose, 1.6, 2-litre, or as in this case 2.4-litre diesel, or 1.6, 2-litre or 3-litre petrol, you should find it to be pretty well equipped. All models include alloy wheels, cruise control and a smart infotainment system, as well as all the usual executive refinements you'd expect for this kind of money. What really sets this car apart though is its safety provision. Now, Volvo safety used to be all about protecting you after you'd had an accident, but today, more laudably, it's more about making sure that you don't have one in the first place. So every S60 gets this City Safe system, a very clever device that picks out objects that you may have missed in the road ahead, and at low speeds can even brake automatically to avoid them, say in stop-start traffic. And at higher speeds can minimise the impact velocity so that the accident isn't as great. If you go a step further and tick the box for the optional driver support pack, then your car becomes even cleverer, with a pedestrian detection system that's able to pick out people as well as objects and automatically brake to avoid them. You also get within the package adaptive cruise control, which keeps you a safe distance to the car in front at cruising speeds, lane departure warning, which stops dozy drivers veering out of their lanes on the highway, and a blind spot information system to stop you dangerously pulling out in front of another car. Now, with all this, it's hard to imagine an S60 owner ever getting into trouble, but if they ever did, there are 6 airbags, stability and traction control, anti-lock brakes and brake assist. The S60 promises low running costs for a car of its size, with the entry-level 1.6 litre 115 brake horsepower drive version most noteworthy in this respect, managing to put out just 114 grams per kilometre of CO2. Many customers, though, will want a bit more poke, and the 5-cylinder 2 litre and 2.4 litre D3 and D5 diesel models don't force you to pay too heavily for it, both managing to put out a reasonable 139 grams per kilometre of CO2 and averaging about 54 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle. Now, those aren't class-leading figures, but they're pretty reasonable for the performance on offer. And it's a similar story when it comes to residual values. Experts predicting that this second-generation S60 will hold its value more in line with BMW and Audi than with Ford and Volkswagen. Insurance groupings range between 28 and 39. Volvo founders Gustav Larsson and Asa Gabrielsson would have been surprised by this S60, but not too surprised. After all, the things that we expect this brand to deliver are certainly very much evident. Solid build quality, sector-leading safety, and a cool, classy Scandinavian feel. It's just that in this case, for the first time, they've been fused with vibrant design, a driver-focused chassis, and a high-tech range of engine options. Now, none of these new virtues are class-leading in themselves, and they aren't quite enough to fully create the naughtily sporty car we're promised in the ads. But when you add them to the smooth-riding, safely sensible Volvo package that this S60 can also deliver, they create an impressive result that's an intriguing alternative to the compact executive mainstream. You should try it.